in looking at potential transportation solutions for along the I-15 corridor and Front Runner corridor between now and 2050. This session will provide an update on the study thus far and discuss how changing trends may affect the future of this corridor. This session is a panel format, so I'll be introducing our panelists here in a few minutes, and then we'll be asking questions of the panelists, and they will be responding to those questions. After the questions are asked of the panelists, we're going to give time for those of you in the audience to ask questions on the topic that we're discussing at the time. So we would encourage interaction and questions throughout this when we get to that point. A couple of housekeeping items. There's a roll going around for those who are in state that serves as your continuing education credits. If there's any of those that are in here from out of state, there are forms up here in the front that you can pick up after this session. You will need to just fill out the form and have one of the panelists sign that form to receive your continuing education credits. So without delaying any longer, let's introduce our panelists for this presentation. And the panel is made up of the 4 agencies that are partnering on this study, as well as our federal highway partners and our project manager on this study as well, which is Lisa Zundel. So let me just start first. My name is Dave Smith, and I'm with Penna Powers, and Penna Powers and the Langdon Group are teamed to be the communications lead on this project in working with communicating this study with our various stakeholders and conducting outreach. I've been with Penna Powers for 20 plus years and currently serve as a managing partner and president of that firm and as the communications project manager on the Wasatch Front Central Corridor study. So I'm excited to be here, and I am the moderator for this panel. We'll just go down the line. Right here to my left is Lisa Zundel. She is a project manager at UDOT Region 2. She holds a Master's of Engineering in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Utah State University. She is the project manager for this study, and her role is to represent the study and all 4 partners, not as a UDOT representative. We have another UDOT representative on this study, which I'll introduce in a minute. So her role is as project manager representing all 4 partners, and she'll talk a little bit more about that. Next to her, we have Sean Seeger. Hey, you guys sat in order of my bios there. Thank you. Sean Seeger is the Director of Regional Planning at Mountain Land Association of Governments in Orem. He holds degrees in landscape architect and public administration. He enjoys Real Salt Lake soccer, skiing Utah's Powder, mountain biking in Moab with family and friends, and he has 2 Austrian Shepherds, Bluebell and Ziggy. So that's Sean. Next to Sean is Steve Call. Steve Call has a master's degree in engineering from Brigham Young University. He is the program development leader at FHWA in the Utah Division Office and has been with Federal Highways for 27 years. He doesn't look old enough to have been there for 27 years. Next to Steve is Mr. Ted Knowlton. He's Deputy Director at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. He is also an adjunct professor in the College of Architecture and Planning at the University of Utah and has a master's in urban and regional planning from Portland State University. Next to Ted, we have Maria Valles, who has a degree in urban planning from the University of Utah and is with Fair and Peers and has been there since 2004. Her focus is on multimodal planning and the interplay between transportation and land use. She is the project manager for this study's technical team. And next to Maria, we have Jeff Harris. And Jeff has worked in the transportation industry for more than 30 years. He started with UTA as a transit planner, was a project manager for Fair and Peers, and later led HNTB's Utah office. He joined UDOT in August of 2013 as a planning director. He has a bachelor's in economics and an MBA from the University of Utah. And then finally, up front, we have G.J. Labonte, who is currently the manager of program development with the Utah Transit Authority. G.J. has more than 18 years of experience in transportation and urban planning. He received a bachelor's degree in architecture from Temple University and a master's degree in geography from the University of Utah. GJ is currently responsible for working with the MPOs along the Wasatch Front in developing the transit elements of the long-range transportation plans. So those are our distinguished panelists that we're excited to have with us today. So as I mentioned, we actually have 5 topics we're going to cover today. The meat of those 5 topics come in 3 of those 5. In the middle of the presentation, where we'd also like your questions and have the panelists address those. But to start, our first topic is simply, what is the Wasatch Front Central Corridor Study and what are the challenges that we face? And we're going to have Ted and Sean and Steve and Lisa address this first question, which is as follows. Why is your organization engaged in this study, and what do you see as the greatest challenge of this study? And we'll start with you, Sean.
All right, thanks, Dave. So in the Utah County area, what we used to do is we used to have the ability to be somewhat separate from Salt Lake. Since that point in time, can you hear me in the back? I'll try to stand up a little bit, or it sounds like the mic is.
There we go.
There we go. Thank you. We used to be somewhat separate from the Salt Lake County area. Provo-Orem did. What's happened over recent years, as many of us realize and see happening, is the Lehigh area is basically filling in. We're seeing a lot of job growth, a lot of commercial buildings in that location, hospitals being opened recently. That whole area between Salt Lake County and Utah County is growing together. So we in Utah County, in the Provo-Orem area, are much more interested in what's happening in Salt Lake County. When Salt Lake County sneezes, Utah County catches a cold. We are that closely related now. So that interplay between Utah County and Salt Lake County is growing together. We're becoming one big metro area. I live in Salt Lake County, but I work in Utah County. Many people are living in Utah County and commuting to Salt Lake County to work. So that interrelationship is very important, and that's probably the primary interest of Mountain Men being involved in this study.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Let's go to you, Ted. Why is your organization engaged in this study, and what do you see as the biggest challenge?
The short answer is Wasatch Front Regional Council is engaged in this study because this corridor has incredible importance to Utah. It is the heart of the jobs in the state, and it's also our central corridor. Hey, there's a ring to that, the central corridor. It is literally our spine, right? And the challenge is, we've been planning with our partners for this corridor for a long time, but what we're seeing is that there's a new challenge on the horizon here. It's already here, that is unlike anything that we have seen before. And it goes something like this. How many of you felt congestion on I-15 today? Okay. All right, now think about how easy or hard it is to widen I-15. Now, double the population of the metro area. What do you think that dynamic is going to be like then? So what we're looking at is an amount of travel demand that mathematically can't be dealt with in old ways. So this is really a story of necessity is the mother of invention. The cool thing is we're faced with incredible travel demand, a constrained corridor, but that is also an incredibly important corridor. So even as we explore all of the solutions that we've looked at in the past, we've got to say, well, how do we get the most out of each lane that we have? How do we take advantage of the fact of the unique characteristics of this corridor, which are, we have transit, rich transit opportunities nearby, and we have a great local street network. So necessity is the mother of invention. That's why we're here.
Great. Thanks, Ted. Steve, why don't you go next and address what the federal partners feel about this study and why you're engaged.
It's my goal to use 10 acronyms during this. So this is the Wasatch Front, WFCCS. I'm from Federal Highway Administration, the federal home of worthless acronyms. About a year ago at this conference, we huddled together to discuss the recently received TIGER grant. And TIGER doesn't refer to Tony the Tiger. It's the Transportation Improvements Generating And because of that, it becomes a PODI, a project of division interest that we review. Later on, we added a SHARP grant, SHRP, Strategic Highway Research Program grant to this, and we're actually testing 4 different tools, and that would get me up to 10 already if I gave those acronyms, but we also have an integrated corridor management, ICM grant, that we're evaluating. Well, we gives feedback into the project, and we have an Everyday Counts, an EDC initiative that where we're actually a MORC, a model of regional collaboration. I get to report on all these things, and so that's one of my challenges. So I do it ASAP, as soon as
We had no idea. That's funny.
Seriously, this study has been a wonderful tool to evaluate, wonderful vehicle to evaluate the tools that Federal Highway is promoting, and it's been something I've been able to share across the nation, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of the study.
And
Great.
you've developed BFFs.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thanks, Steve. THX. All right, Lisa, rather than addressing the same question we asked the other 3, will you talk about your unique role on this project?
So, as Dave mentioned when he introduced me, I am a UDOT project manager, but for this project, I am acting as project manager for all 4 agencies. It's been a bit of a challenge understanding what each of the other agencies has at the heart of their agency. I have a fairly good idea of what UDOT is, where we're going, what we want to do, where we want to head, but learning that of each of the other agencies was a bit of a challenge in the beginning. As we had conversations and met as a team, I started to understand where each of the agencies was coming from and what was important to them. We were able to come together as a team and really start looking to the future of this corridor and looking to the future of the Wasatch Front and what we can do to improve the transportation system along this corridor, and as well as those areas that influence this corridor. It's not just the corridor that you see highlighted in the map. It really is all those areas that influence that corridor as well. And bringing the 4 agencies together was critical and crucial to really come up with a solution that will make this corridor, as well as those areas of influence, move into that 2050 planning horizon where our population is projected to double, and we really need to come up with some different solutions, some new solutions, and look at those measurements of how we're measuring those solutions differently than we have in the past.
Great, thanks, Lisa. The next topic that we will cover is partnering, and we're going to ask Jeff and GJ and Lisa again to respond to a question regarding partnering. As you may guess, with bringing 4 different agencies together who have their own initiatives and mission statements and goals, how do you all work together? After they are done giving their answers to the questions, we will open it up for about 5 minutes of audience Q&A as well. So the question is, what challenges have you faced as these organizations, these 4 agencies, have worked together on the study, and how have you addressed those challenges? Let's start with Jeff.
Thank you. I think you all know about the great partnership that we have along the Wasatch Front with our transportation partners. It's quite remarkable. We were actually able to present to an NCHRP panel last week, and the topic of it was collaboration and corridor analysis. And when we tell other folks what we do and how we do transportation planning here, they just kind of shake their head and they look at each other in disbelief, actually. So we all know that it's there. Now, having said that, I will say that partnering is tough, right? We're not going to turn this into a love fest today, really, because it is tough in order to partner. I think from my position, I think what it really helps is when we can have open, frank discussions among each other. We will sit in some of these meetings and talk about tough topics, and it's okay to talk about tough topics. It's okay to disagree. Those are some of the keys. We have a consensus decision-making matrix or process that we're going to use as we move forward with this. I think the biggest challenge, quite frankly, and they're going to talk about it later, was coming up with the goals for this corridor. What does this corridor need to do? And I'm not going to go into them now. But just to say, it took, what, 3 months of hard dialogue between the various agencies to come at a consensus on what those goals should be. So again, we have a great history of collaboration along the Wasatch Front, but it's tough, and it's supposed to be tough. I think our constituents want it to be tough. We have to ask each other tough questions and be willing to have open, frank dialogue.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. GJ, would you like to go next?
Sure. The biggest challenge, acronyms, by far. Actually, I have learned a lot of new acronyms, and that's actually part of both the challenge and the benefits, I think, of the partnerships among the agencies. These are big agencies. FHWA is a big agency. UDOT is a big agency. UTA has different modes and goals and objectives, as you mentioned, Dave. But I love the fact that we have our MPO partners here, not as mediators per se, but they manage and produce the regional long-range transportation plan, not the regional long-range highway plan, not the regional long-range transit plan. They are great partners in this. So I think the challenges actually represent the biggest opportunities in this particular study. And then you asked how we deal with it. Oh, and the personalities. Throughout this panel discussion, you'll discover that our challenges are among the different personalities here. But we are all getting along just fine. How do we deal with those challenges? I think the best, Jeff alluded to it, is that we just take our agency hats off, just put them on the chair or check them at the door or whatever the analogy is as we come into these management meetings. And sometimes it's hard. We have to think differently. I have to think outside of the normal planning toolbox that I've had for the last 12 years at UTA. But I will say in conclusion that it's fun. I love my job. I love looking out into the future. I love thinking about what this is going to be, how this is going to benefit my children. So.
Great. Thanks, GJ. Lisa.
So one of the things we did as we went into the partnering on this is we determined that it wasn't just this team that needed to buy into the partnering and needed to be a part of some of the discussions that we had. So we developed a partnering agreement with not only this team, but the executives of each of the agencies as well. And those executives bought into how we wanted to do the consensus decision-making, as Jeff mentioned, as well as how we wanted to move forward if there were decisions that this team couldn't come to or that we needed to take up to make sure we were headed in the right direction. The executives bought into how we wanted to do that, and we had conversations with them in developing that. Each of the agencies signed the partnering agreement that lines out how those things are going to happen, and we really came together and made this something that is a truly collaborative effort. I recently was at a conference in South Carolina talking to some people from some other states, and I mentioned that I was doing a study that involved 2 MPOs, our transit agency, as well as our DOT, and a few of them kind of went, how did you get them to work together? And I said, it's just the way we do things in Utah. We come together to find solutions that are really going to benefit our communities and benefit the users of those systems. I've mentioned in a few of our meetings that we're really looking for that synergistic approach. We want the solutions and the package of solutions we come up with to have a synergistic result rather than just one individual solution. And I think as we move forward and as we start coming up with solutions, we'll continue to come together even more on things that can enhance our transportation system along the Wasatch Front.
Great, thank you. Before we open to the audience for any of you who have questions on the partnering topic, Will you just address, Lisa, the consensus-based model approach that we're taking? What does that actually mean? What is the agreement in using that?
No physical contact.
There's a lot of yelling. No, I'm just kidding. We have agreed that we will come to a decision that everyone can agree on. There may be certain levels of agreement, but it has to be something that everybody can see as a positive outcome, and can say, yes, I am comfortable moving forward with this decision and moving forward with this particular solution that we may come up with. Anybody else want to add?
Yes, go ahead.
I would add one thing. I think what we all agreed on too as well is that escalation is not failure. And so if we get to a point and an impasse, our executive directors will be there and we escalated to that point. We haven't gotten to that point and hopefully we won't get to that point. But again, well, that just says it is a failure. Well, it's not a failure. That's why our executives signed the partnering agreement. We all agreed to that. And so that's there as well.
Great, thank you. We'd like to give an opportunity to the audience to ask questions now about how these four groups have partnered and the challenges that they face. Anyone have a question from the audience that'd like to ask of any of the panelists, not just the ones that answered this question, but any? Crickets? Yes, Dan.
Is there symbolism in how you're all packed together?
No.
I am enjoying the body heat from my fellow panelists. I'll just be honest.
That's why my arms are crossed, not because I'm closed.
When we get to the project goals, which is the next topic, I think this is the project goals and the length of time it took to come to consensus on the goals is a good example of the partnering and the challenges and the successes. I think I could speak for the whole panel in saying that getting to consensus on the goals took a lot longer than we all thought. Because we went the rounds and the rounds and the rounds on the goals and with different questions from the different agencies of what was important to them. And so it took a long time to get to that point, but when we signed the partnering agreement as a team, the team said we are not going to move forward past decision points at various stages of this project without having consensus. Otherwise, that will come back and bite us in the end, because we'll get down the road to a point where someone may say, well, I didn't actually agree way back a year ago on those goals. And so it would completely throw off the ability to get to a good point with this study. And so we had to take that extra time to resolve the concerns and frustrations that different partners had with the goals, so that we made sure that we were all in a consensus-based approach with those before we move forward to the next stage of the study. I will also say that, as part of teaming and partnering, you go through, a lot of you are familiar with the stages of teaming, where you form a team, and then you storm, and then hopefully after you go through storming, you norm, and then you start to perform. And this team definitely has been through a storming phase, where we had to talk to each other and have some honest conversations in different formats to say how we're going to work together and how can we resolve concerns and be open and transparent about what we're trying to do. But I think we can honestly say that we're in that norming phase and we want to get to that performing phase. And that doesn't mean you don't go back and storm for a little while at different parts, but as long as you make it through that storming phase and start to norm, you can get to where you can perform. Before we move to the goals question, any other panelists want to address partnering? Good? Okay, let's move on to the project goals. I've just brought up a slide that shows the 8 goals that we have for this project. Many of these project goals are outside the norm of what you might see. whether you work for UDOT or UTA or one of the MPOs. But we're going to ask the panelists now to address how they expect the goals to drive the outcomes of the study, and how do we get to consensus. How did you get to consensus on the goals inside of your organization, not on the team, but how did you go back to your organization and get consensus on these goals because they're outside the norm? And then how did we achieve consensus within the study team? And let's start, GJ, why don't we start with you on this one? Is that okay?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing to notice on the list up that you see up there is that it's mode neutral. So you don't see things like highway safety or improved transit ridership. And that was intentional and actually part of the 3-month storming process, as Dave described it. But that also fleshed out a lot of the, again, the opportunities. So it was a point of conflict, it was a challenge, but in the end, I think we ended up learning a lot. One of the things that I meant to mention as part of the challenges is that I have to learn how to ask questions. I don't know a lot about highway transit or highway design, construction, engineering, the challenges that they face, so I have to be willing to ask questions. And so I learned a lot relative to the development of these goals. I think one of the most unique ones that I see up there is that person throughput in the corridor. If you think about that in terms of the numbers of seats crossing a screen line, and we looked at a couple of these in our management meeting this week, say at 106 South. You draw a line all the way from State Street, across I-15, across Front Runner over to, say, Redwood Road. How many seats are passing that in the morning in both directions, northbound, southbound? What's the capacity? What's the available capacity in that, across that screen line? That's a unique way of looking at this particular corridor that I haven't been involved in my experience in studying these types of transportation projects. Reliability. What can we measure the time that somebody spends on a transit vehicle, the productive time, if some people take naps, but if the time that people spend on a transit vehicle doing things that they normally wouldn't be able to do if they were traveling in a single occupant vehicle. Is there a metric for that? Is there a way to give a benefit to that? So these are goals that have, like I said, not have traditionally been part of EISs and studies that I've been a part of over the years. As far as getting consensus within the agency, we've had to do some education as well. So we've gone back to our executives and sat down and said, we will focus on transit at some point, and we'll bring our level of experience and expertise to bear on that when it comes to what's the capacity, what's the AM northbound capacity for the red line. That's something a question I can answer, but we also have to be willing to listen to what some of the other challenges are from our partners. And so once we got that communicated to our executives inside the agency, they came along pretty quickly. And so I think that picture that you see up there, or that you saw up there with the partnering agreement, is probably the best example of everyone willing to look at this project from a different perspective. So again, I'm excited.
Great. Thanks, GJ. Ted, let's go to you next and to address the goals. I know there's a couple that you were particularly passionate about. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I like the way that these goals have come together. And, it was a little bit painful, but I think it was a very fruitful process. And at the end of the day, as GJ noted, we're not laying out this improvement for this mode. We're instead asking the question, what is the benefit that the ultimate set of strategies that comes out of this plan, what is that benefit that is given to the traveling public, to businesses, to the economy? And so, in essence, the package that emerges from this project must make the business case. And going back to the studs, if you will, and asking the question, well, what are the goals that then in turn relate to benefits to the public and the economy and businesses, that's really fruitful. So I'm going to highlight one of them that I think is a little different, and that is it starts with increased regional accessibility. So I'm going to start by asking you, I'm going to give you a little thought game here, okay? Ask yourself which of these two, let's say that you emerge at another conference that's very similar to this, but it's in another city, unnamed, and you're hungry, maybe like you are now, and you want to go to lunch, and it turns out there's way too many people at this conference for the space that they have available for lunch, and so at the last minute, the conference organizers say, well, we're going to give people the option. You can get on a train that's high speed to an alternate location. It'll take you 10 minutes, and there's no line at all. The food is the same. Or you can wait in line. It'll take you 5 minutes to get your food where you are now. Which do you choose? Okay, you don't need, I'm not going to do a raise of hands. But a number of you are going to pick, well, 5 minutes. And why? Because you're getting something done faster. You're more productive. Even though, if you think about how that might compare or fare out in a traditional goal process, we're all about, as an industry, delivering mobility, speed, okay? The speed to that other destination is quicker, the speed was fast, but the productivity was better in the other option of just waiting in line for 5 minutes, okay? So where am I going with this? Productivity, how do we answer the question, how do we design a system that is productive to get people to finish and do the work that they want to do? So let me back this out into a broader story of this. In the real world, right, we have businesses that make decisions about where they're going to locate based on how many employees can reach that business within 20 or 30 minutes, okay? That's the way businesses are making decisions. What if we as a transportation industry made a decision in a similar way? How do we increase the range of destinations that a household can get to, the range of employees that can get to individual businesses, so that we're maximizing the productivity of the system? Now, when I say the system, this is where it gets back to the central corridor. The system is not just the transportation system, it's also the land use system. And that the system is actually the pattern of homes and businesses and development and the transportation system. Those two together deliver productivity, right? And so you can think of, if we want to improve regional accessibility within the central corridor, well, we can do that by faster speed, less congestion, things like that we traditionally work on. And we can think about, well, what if there were more homes near jobs? What if both of those were nearer transit stations? So that we're thinking about, how do we deliver more productivity? So I appreciate you indulging me on that little tangent. Now, for the central corridor, what's interesting is that we're taking a look at both sides of the system. We're looking at transportation and land use. And so that means exploring with communities through the regional transportation plan process, where do you see growth happening out over a time horizon that goes all the way out to 2050? This is well beyond their general plans. And so it's an honest question. And it's also looking at and asking the question, how do we as transportation providers influence where development might happen, right? So if we add, I don't anticipate this being looked at, but let's say we add a new interchange, that changes how much growth might happen near that interchange, or a new transit stop, or a new route. We're shaping where development wants to happen. We can be purposeful about that and think, how does that actually help improve the productivity of the land use and transportation system? So you can tell I'm excited about this concept because it's a new way to explore success of the overall land use and transportation system. And I wanted to talk about how that might apply to the central corridor and how it's an interesting new idea to think about how do we succeed.
Great. Thanks, Ted. Maria, why don't you go next? And you have the unique perspective of how did we get to these goals, and what was that process, and how are they going to affect the outcomes of this study? How are we going to measure these goals?
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, I have a little bit of a different perspective being the project manager of the consultant team. And, you know, I'm kind of the one that's like scope, schedule, budget. We need to kind of keep moving forward on a path here. And so we started out, you know, looking at what are the different agency perspectives, what's in their strategic documents, what do we hear from the public in efforts like Envision Utah's values survey or from some other stakeholder efforts that Dave and the communications team had done. So what did we start hearing about, you know, what are the priorities for this corridor? And then we had really asked the agencies, representatives that I'm seated with here, to be honest about what their agency's priorities really were. We can't expect that UTA and UDOT and the MPOs are always necessarily going to have the same priorities. They serve different purposes sometimes. And so we really did ask them to be honest, and that did result in sometimes very, very long discussions that went from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And, you know, I have my opinions too. It was hard for me to sometimes just keep my big mouth shut and let them have the conversations, because we could tell that the conversations needed to happen. And so sometimes I was having a lot of internal dialogue about like, okay, is this conversation productive? They seem to be making progress. We seem to be really, you know, getting to an understanding here. And then sometimes me and Lisa would go, okay, I think we might be perseverating. It might be time to, you know, table this topic for maybe another time and resolve it in another day. But it seemed like the length of time that it took to have those conversations was really critical in order to get the consensus on the goals. And it did take us quite a bit past the schedule end date for that task. So we're needing to kind of adapt some other things on that end to make it work. And I think it's really sweet that we keep referring to it in the past tense like we're done. We're not actually done because we have the next step after this is to identify for each one of these goals, how are we going to measure those goals? Because we need to expect that every one of our future 2050 scenarios that we put together that will incorporate both transportation and land use, as Ted referred to, we're going to be measuring those somehow. We have to know how they're going to be living up to these goals that we've set. So that's kind of where we're at right now, is identifying what are those metrics. And we've, from our consultant team's perspective, Chad here in the front row is part of our team as well. But we've been trying to put forth, you know, here are some ideas for how other regions have addressed this particular question, whether it's travel time reliability or whether it's accessibility, and here's how that looks like, how that information gets presented in graphical form. So that's, you know, part of the tool set we've been using to go, okay, if you would want to go down this path that's an unfamiliar path in terms of this goal, here's how we might potentially be able to look at that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Maria. We'll now open up to questions from the audience about any of the goals specifically and how we got to those goals, or what the thinking is behind those goals. Any questions or comments from the audience on this topic? Yes.
How are you coordinating the goals of this study with the goals of other large studies that are ongoing or just started like before?
Great. The question was, how are we coordinating the goals of this study with other studies that are currently ongoing or getting started, like Mountain Accord? Who would like to address that question? Sean.
You know, the goals of this study, from my perspective, actually originate from some work that the 4 agencies did about 2 years ago when we're being challenged by Fed Highway Administration to come up with some performance measures. And 6 of these 8 goals originate from 6 goals that were established by our agencies a couple years ago. And I remember Corey Pope kind of leading this discussion. We were all excited. We came into Carlos and Shane's office with 27 different goals and performance measures. And Shane and Carlos were very nice, but very direct, and they said, you guys are crazy. You cannot measure 27 different points in this transportation system. You have to get it down to something that we can actually collect data on, afford to collect the data on, and that it means something to people. And so Corey Pope was very instrumental in us getting to those 6 that I think are represented here. And those 6 goals, I think, are embraced by all agencies, including some of the Mountain Accord participants, UTA, WFRC as well. So I think that we are concentrating on a set of goals that are generally embraced. Safety, for example. Is safety exclusive of this project? No. It's included in every project that we work on. And I think you can tie these 8 goals back to those 6 is maybe the way to respond, Dave.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Another question, yes.
On the
Okay, good question. Who'd like to address that?
Do you mind if I address it? Sure. I think what we're trying to say is there is no stated percentage that we want it to be at the end of the day. What we would like to see ultimately, and I think everybody agrees with this, is a multimodal system that does have balance, not only between transit and roadway, but active transportation, cyclists. So generally, we want to improve mode balance. How we're going to do that is we're going to assess those investment strategies and look at mode balance again as one of those metrics and say, okay, which one of the investment strategies does a better job at bringing more balance to our mode share? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just curious if you had some percentage or
No.
if you're just trying to look at use of all modes, there's not a set number you're trying to get.
No.
Right.
Go ahead, TJ.
I think we originally had used the word increase with the intent that, hey, maybe we need to suppress one and increase a different mode, but we were corrected on that we said, no, that's not the right approach to this. We need to just look at the total number of trips or what we have to deal with as a pie and just find a reasonable balance in that pie of trips and the modes that people are using to travel in this scope of all trips.
And I think if I may add, that this was one goal where we had a lot of discussion about, is transit or roads actually listed as a goal, and we didn't want a preconceived outcome. And so we stepped back and said, let's just work on mode balance, no percentages, but let's just work on mode balance. We don't have a preconceived outcome. There was a question over here.
Has there been any prioritization of the goals themselves?
Great question. Lisa, you raised your hand.
There hasn't been to this point, although we're working with John Thomas over at UDOT to go through a decision lens type activity to look at where, for each of these goals and for some of the metrics as well, where some of that prioritization may sit. We understand that there may be a solution that meets one goal that perhaps doesn't meet or doesn't fully meet another goal. And where is the importance on which one it's meeting? So we recognize that there are some things we need to do to say, if we're meeting one goal but not meeting another, which is this solution really going to give us the benefit we need, and that some prioritization of those goals can help that. And I think we're doing our decision lens next week to help develop some of that prioritization of these goals, but currently we haven't put any weight to them.
Ted, you look like you want to say something. Do you
No,
want?
no.
Are you okay?
I was fascinated by what she was saying.
Oh, wonderful. That's the type of team we are.
I mean,
Okay.
originally we did have the goals numbered, 1 through 8, but we took the numbering off specifically because we didn't want to imply that anyone is more important than any other at this point.
Good point. We have one more meaty topic that we want to cover. So if you have more questions on the goals, if we have time at the end, we can come back to those. I think we addressed the 2 or 3 questions that I saw the hands up. So the next topic is trends in transportation. And we're going to ask Jeff, Sean, and Maria to address this question, which is, what trends in transportation do you think may change the way planning has been done in the past or may influence the solutions? And this, quite honestly, I think is the fun part of the study that everyone wants to get to. We had to go through all that work on the goals, but they really want to get to this point. So with that question in mind, Sean, do you mind if we start with you?
No, that'd be great. I think immediately to Carlos's speech yesterday, if you were able to attend the luncheon, his description of the Tesla vehicle that had a software push to it 2 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago, where it turned it into basically a semi-autonomous vehicle. It can drive itself in its own travel lane on freeway systems. I think this is the biggest challenge that we have in this study, is taking our travel demand model that's based on certain capacities and the throughput of certain facilities and saying that that's the way it's going to be from this point forward. We have to change that. We have to look at that and try to understand what percentage Are we talking 20%, 30%, 40% more efficient? Walmart yesterday, I think they announced that they are testing drone delivery. They have stores within 5 miles of 70% of the US population. What is that gonna do to change travel demand? So these trends in transportation, how can this study accommodate these unknowns? You think of the Donald Rumsfeld speech. There are known knowns, there are unknown knowns. So we have a bunch of unknown out there that we are trying to deal with, and Fair and Peers has been great to try to engage this topic head on with us and create a system for us to try to anticipate some of that and account for it in a travel demand modeling perspective. With that, I'll maybe turn it over to Maria and Jeff.
Go ahead. Jeff, do you want to go next?
Go ahead.
You're the last two to answer
Are you
this.
sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. You know, we've been having some amazing conversations with commercial developers over the last 6 months. One in particular we met with, and he builds warehouse and distribution in the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake County. And what was remarkable about the meeting with this guy is that he and his partners know our transportation system better than I think a lot of us know it. I mean, these guys are out there every single day trying to make money, right? Build facilities that are going to be relevant in 10 or 15 years from now. And they knew every aspect of our transportation system. It was remarkable. The other thing that we found out from this, so I guess where I was going with that is, we often look at transportation from one lens, right? From planners and engineers' perspective, regional delay, those type of metrics. Transportation community, or a good part of our community, looks at it entirely different than we do. And so what we need to do as planners is we need to start putting their lens on, putting their glasses on, and start seeing the world from their perspectives. For example, this developer was able to go to Amazon's new distribution facility in Southern California. Yeah, there were cutouts for drones, but that wasn't the most remarkable to him. The most remarkable to him was the amount of refrigeration and freezer space in that facility. And it's there because essentially they're going to be your future grocery store. That will have huge travel demand implications, right? If brick and mortar goes away and everything's delivered, it's going to have huge impact on travel demand, how we plan our facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Sean's spot on. I think the days of relying on past trends and future point estimates in our planning are over. We have to figure out a different way to do that. I would say that the other thing out there in terms of trends is demographic change, and you've all heard that. The millennials, I'm not convinced that they're not going to do what we did, but that's all right, we'll find out. But even that, the aging of America, right, the changing demographic mix of America is all going to have impacts on our transportation system, and travel patterns are different, and so we need to try to understand that as well. And I guess I'll cut it off there. And did I leave you anything to talk about?
You left me a couple things. Yeah, so like Sean said, I think the automated and connected vehicles is a really important and interesting part of this conversation, not only in terms of what does it mean for our travel demand model and our ability to see the future, and what does it mean for lane capacities? Are we going to be able to fit more cars into the lanes and have better utilization of the capacity that we do have? But what are the potential for vehicles that can talk to each other to reduce collisions? Because if you look at the data for how much of the congestion that occurs on I-15 is related to collisions, it's huge. If we could stop that, we could really improve reliability, we can improve safety, you know, some of the goals that we've got on the board up here that we've talked about. Something else that we're interested in exploring in part of the study is the role of transportation networking companies, your Uber, your Lyft, your Bridge, which is a ride-sharing transit, like a microtransit kind of company, and how is that going to change the way that people get around? And in some places, it kind of depends. Like in the Bay Area, there's been some research that indicates that microtransit companies are actually taking away from the more traditional transit companies. People are choosing to call one of these services and get a ride from point A to point B rather than getting on BART or getting on Muni. And in other areas, those kinds of companies are actually engaging actively with the transit companies to help support them. They're saying, you know, let us help you on your paratransit routes. Let us help you on your bus routes that are the low performers so you can focus more on your rail lines that are your successful ridership stories. So that's going to be an interesting thing for us to explore here with this. I think it could potentially really change the way that people travel. But, you know, it's kind of one of those things we keep telling ourselves, we talk about these concepts in the course of the study, and sometimes we go, that's never gonna happen, you know, that's, because of the paradigm that we're familiar with today, we think, well, that's just not a thing that's ever gonna happen here, but we have to remember, this is 35 years from now. You know, the world that we look at today is dramatically different than it was 10 years ago. How can we even say 35 years from now, this still will not be a reality? So we just have to continually remind ourselves that the world is more open than we think it is.
Thanks, Maria. Lisa, you wanted to address this as well.
Yeah, so along with the trends in transportation, I think it's critical for us to recognize what some of our policies will allow us to do right now and may not allow us to do right now. That's one of the things we're going to be looking at as part of this study, especially as we're looking to the future and looking to some of these technology type solutions. Is there a need for policy change? Is there a need for having those conversations to help the policymakers understand what's coming in the future and what may need to be enhanced or modified in our policies to make sure that we can accommodate some of these solutions that may give us a real benefit as we move to the future. We've started conversations with some of our policymakers in the state to help them understand where we're going with this study and make sure that they understand what we're looking at and that we keep them up to speed on where we're going, because we don't want them to have us come to them with a solution that may be a policy change type solution and have them go, wait a minute, I don't understand this, I don't think we need to go there. We want them to have the background necessary for them to understand where some of these technologies may take us in the future and have them looking to the future as well on how they're setting the policies for our state.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Questions on this topic, trends in transportation, from the audience? Any? Yes.
Forgive me, I came in 10 minutes late, so if you answered this in the first 10 minutes, please everybody forgive me. But do you see this as a study of alternate futures? So you'd analyze sort of different futures?
We did not address that question. Who would like to take the alternate futures?
I could take a stab at that.
Okay.
Great question. We still have yet to work out exactly how this is going to proceed, but I think that it will go this way, that we will look at different scenarios that explore complementary packages of strategies and how they relate to development patterns and see together how well they serve our goals. Traditional scenarios, integrated land use and transportation, but maybe more to your point, so we have all this uncertainty about the timing and the extent and the consequences of emerging technologies like connected and autonomous vehicles. And so perhaps it is, if you will, stress testing these futures to say, well, okay, so we have 3 scenarios. Let's say that there's widespread adoption of connected and autonomous. And let's say it has these consequences. Which of these is best suited to perform well under that resiliency test, if you will? So I think that that might be the way that we explore that, rather than perhaps having a myriad of alternatives, having a few alternatives, but seeing how well they perform under different potential future circumstances. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think there's going to be a number of assumptions about how we think, you know, the world will function in the future, and you know, I agree with what Ted's saying. I think we're also going to need to say, okay, we think this is sort of the range in which this sort of factor might be, you know, playing out in the future, and you know, given the amount of discussion that I've seen take place on the goals, I anticipate there should be a fair amount of discussion on what that range, what those brackets are for the future as well, but I think we're going to need to establish what those are, document what those are, and move forward with what those assumptions are for the future.
Good question. Yes.
There's no flying cars in the future.
Nothing is off the table.
We almost put a picture of the Jetsons on this slide. But.
I will say, in one of the executive meetings that we had where Carlos was pretty frank about this, saying he's so excited about the opportunities that are available here, but he also, you know, cautioned us to bring him back something that he can endorse, support, and our executives felt the same way. So it's that balance between, yeah, we want to be dreaming, we don't want to be limited by current technologies,
Or current policies, as
or
Lisa stated.
policies, but yeah.
Do you mind if I
Go ahead,
just do
Ted.
a brief follow-up on that? I think that we tend to emphasize this horizon year of 2050, but the notion of this is that it becomes the shared multi-agency blueprint that then shapes the investments that we make in transportation throughout that period, and that it finds its home in the regional transportation plans of Wasatch Front and MAG, which they themselves are developed in an integrated fashion with UDOT and UTA, and then we all march forward and implement those moving forward. And, you know, among other things, Wasatch Front is available as well to work with communities to help them think about the place-making aspect of improving destination accessibility.
That's a great point. Thanks, Ted, for clarifying just how the outcomes of this study will be used. They will be integrated into those regional transportation plans of both planning organizations. Great point.
Which are fiscally constrained.
Yes. Other questions on this topic? Great. Let's move to the last question, which is study schedule and our engagement process. And I'm going to have Lisa address this. What is the current status of the project, Lisa, and its schedule for completion?
So as we've talked about a little bit, we are currently wrapping up the goals. We have a little bit more work to do on that, and as well as the metrics associated with that. But we're starting into the process of coming up with those long-range solutions, coming up with packages of scenarios, of investment packages. And then as we move through the end of the year and into the spring and summer of next year, we'll be evaluating those packages against our goals and metrics, and then towards the end of next year, we'll be recommending a final package to move forward into the development of the 2019-2050 long-range plan for both Wasatch Front and MAG. Along with that, we're also doing outreach and stakeholder engagement throughout the process. We've recently started reaching out to local elected officials, gone to several meetings, informing mayors of what's going on, informing their technical staff, city planners and city engineers of the things that we're doing and the things we're going to be looking at, so that they have a basis of the study before we reach out to them and start talking to them about scenarios and getting their input on those. Additionally, we're starting to reach out to, as I mentioned before, our policymakers and helping them understand what the study is, and we'll be continuing to reach out to them throughout the course of the study to make sure that they understand where we're headed and what may be coming out of this study. And I think that kind of takes us to the end.
Great. We have 2 minutes left in this session. Do we have any questions on any of the topics that we've covered in this panel discussion, or anything else that you may be curious about this study? Yes?
Who is funding this?
Great question. Who is funding this study?
Go ahead, Lisa.
So we have $820,000 in funds from FHWA through the Tiger Grant program that Steve mentioned earlier, as well as each of the agencies have put in a match of local funds to that. We also have $150,000 in SHARP 2 funds for the SHARP 2 elements that were mentioned earlier that are part of that study, as well as each of the agencies has what we're calling in-kind, but basically our time is considered part of those funds as well.
Good. Other questions of our panelists? Okay, great. We are almost right at 10:50, which is our end time. So if you are from out of state and need to grab a form up here at the front table, please come up and do so and have one of these panelists sign it. Steve will do it in initials, in an acronym format. And feel free to come up and talk to any of them individually with any further questions that you have. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for your time.